Okay, hello everyone, welcome. Okay. Okay, Tanya, you're going to do the waiting room and I will get started, okay?
Yep.
So welcome everyone. Welcome to our Friday Town Hall this week as we've been continuing our series on social justice, which our focus has been our role in ending systemic and internal racism. And particularly as it applies to our Montessori community. We have been led over these past number of weeks by Dr. Cindy Acker, as we will continue to be led today. This is part of our social justice task force and the homework we've been doing and reading certain books and coming back to discuss. And Cindy has been leading a guided study on many aspects of what we can do to explore our own implicit biases, as well as the biases we might be bringing into our classrooms, our teacher education programs, our interactions with faculty and families and children. So we're going to continue today. Today's focus is on classroom again, because of course, we do believe that where the children are concerned is probably our biggest area of opportunity for all of us. So without too much further ado, I will introduce myself, Kathy Leach. I'm the Executive Director of the International Montessori Council and a consultant with the Montessori Foundation. So on behalf of both organizations, I welcome you today and look forward to our study with Dr. Cindy. She will be leading and also being assisted by Sarah LaValle. Sarah is, I believe, I don't know the exact title, but I think it's Equity Coordinator.
Director of Social Justice.
Director of Social Justice, that's more intuitive. Thank you for that. Director of Social Justice, and so she's helping us with this as well. And we acknowledge and appreciate her contribution to what we're doing. Thanks all for being here. We have had wonderful conversations and learning a lot. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Acker to get us started. And for those of you who don't know, the agenda is in the chat box. The chat box is on the bottom. If you click on chat, you will find your chat box and you can add comments there. There's going to be many people on the meeting today, and so it's not possible for every single person to talk. We want to make sure that everyone who wants to has an opportunity to share. So please be brief in your comments and make sure you use the chat box for additional commentary, because we can save that as well. And we can tell you how to save that towards the end of the session today. So Cindy, if you want to go ahead and take over, we'll get started.
So we're dedicating the moment of silence today to educators to assist us in our ability to be courageous and to be open about the information that we receive today. And I'm also dedicating it to children everywhere, because right now there's such a question about, will children be in school, in person, will it be remote, all of the areas of angst that are around what's plaguing us internationally right now in education. And so I want us to just hold that in our first moment of silence. Thank you. So I like to always start by asking, has anybody had any reflections from this past week? Reflections from what we talked about in terms of the classroom, things that you've heard, things that you've read, things that you encountered or began feeling. If anyone has anything to share before we move forward.
Christine has something, Cindy.
I would just like to acknowledge the power and the grace of hearing John Lewis's words yesterday and hearing President Obama share his thoughts. It's an inspiration, and it's a call to action to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Just as a reminder, we're watching for your hand to go up, but also there's a much easier way for us to be able to see. If you click on your participants button, there is a place for you to be able to raise your hand electronically, and then we can see that. It's a little easier for us to track. So if you do want to speak, that's probably the best way to do it. We're also monitoring, but there's several pages of faces here. So click on participants, and then you'll see a little box that comes up sort of in your chat box, and it says raise hand.
Okay. So if we don't have any other comments, Sarah is going to show a video that is just a piece of a video. And Sarah, if you can end up putting the link in the chat when you're done. It's about a teen, and there are a couple of teens who speak, and so it's worthy of someone listening to it at some point. But I'd like you to just listen to her words, which tells us why it's so important that we engage in this work around the classroom.
On the other hand, when approaching white people with my biracial identity, their responses were rather surprising. I'm a sophomore at Boston Latin Academy, and during my almost 4 years at the school, I've encountered some challenging situations regarding race. When I was in the 8th grade, I became more open about the fact that I was biracial instead of letting others assume that I was Hispanic or Cape Verdean. These conversations revealed the racism and the prejudice that some white people have towards people of color. Some of my white peers started to tell me crazy things, such as, my dad said black people aren't allowed over the house because they steal, or is that my parents would disown me if I ever dated a black guy. Being a teenager and hearing these things really started to make me think, is this what my white family said about my dad to my mother? In the end, excuse me, is this what the is this what the general white population thinks about me and other people of color? In the end, it all goes back to the question of identity and how, since slavery, racism has impacted how people feel about themselves and about others. So what are we going to do about these negative stereotypes that run through our society that are both hurtful and inaccurate? To begin with, days like today are very important. We need to have more opportunities to talk openly and honestly about race. When we do this, more people will learn to stop making assumptions. Then we can begin to have honest conversations about people's cultures and learn that the negative assumptions that are made about others are not true. Breaking down these negative stereotypes are an important step. We need these conversations to take place in schools and within different communities, people of all ages in the process. We need conversations between people.
Sarah, why don't you go out?
People who live in the city and people who live between rich and between. We will never break down these stereotypes unless we bring people together so that they get to know each other and face in this country. Breaking down stereotypes is just the first step. There also needs to be a commitment to root out the systematic racism that puts so many young people of color in jail and denies us the educational that denies us the educational and vocational opportunities that we deserve.
Thank you. And so those are the words of a teen. Sarah, you can stop sharing your screen for me.
Developing our relationships and understanding of each other will serve as a foundation to build a more just society where all of us.
And those are the words of a teen, one of many. And if we thought that it only affected teenagers and not very young children, I want you to see a test that was done, and you've probably all heard of the doll test. It was done many, many years ago before Brown versus the Board of Education in order to stop segregation of schools, but CNN redid it. And so, Sarah, can you show that?
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and he has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me?
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
Okay.
This one.
That one?
I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
He's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, that one.
Oh, I'm sorry, keep going.
Which one?
This one.
Why do you want that skin color?
Because I don't know. I don't know.
Not sure. What do you think of that skin color?
Well, it looks kind of whitish, and that's all I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you? Why do you want that skin color?
Because it looks lighter than this kind, because this looks a lot like that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't like the way brown looks, because the way brown looks really nasty for some reason, but I don't know what reason. That's all.
So you think it looks nasty?
Well, not really, but sometimes.
Sometimes. And Brielle, they asked what color adults don't like. Do you remember what you said? Which one? That's right, that's what you said. Why do you think adults don't like that color?
Dark.
Dark. And adults, you think adults don't like dark?
Well, maybe some adults do, but maybe some of them don't.
Mm. And then which was the ugly child?
So show me the smart child. Okay, why is she the smart child?
Because she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the mean child. Okay, why is she the mean child?
Because she's way darker.
Okay. Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
Because I think she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is she the bad child?
Because she's a lot darker.
Show me the ugly child. Why is she the ugly child?
Because she's like, a lot darker.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, I have seen this test so many times, and I saw the question in the chat about who was administering the test. The test was developed by a Black psychologist many years ago, and used, and it has been, different people have administered the doll test. It is always the same. It's always the same. And that's just so sad when you think about it, because when you listen to the questions that were asked, and part of the testimony that psychologists gave on when they were in the Supreme Court cases that had to do with Brown versus the Board of Education, they said, this is not a one-off. This is not something that goes away. It's something that continues and gets exacerbated by society, and that when we have laws that then incorporate things that allow for racism, it then makes racism okay by law, and it affects an individual, and it is the law that has allowed it to take place. And so I want you to hold that in the conversations that we need to have about Montessori classrooms, and to ask, what does a Montessori environment, an anti-racist Montessori environment, look like? What does that look like? Because we need to roll out educators who know how to set up and guide a Montessori environment, knowing that children of color will often tend to feel as though they are less than, that they are not equal to, and that another race is better than their own. That's the work. That's the work that we have to be able to turn that around. And so I want you to think out, and for us to brainstorm, what does an anti-racist Montessori environment look like? When we commit to anti-racism, what does our environment look like? And while you're thinking, I'm gonna just read you, I mentioned last week that there were two comments from Montessorians that I had found on the internet, and I'm gonna read you a little bit about from the other one. The teacher says, over the 6 years that I have been a Montessori teacher, my mission has continuously had one common purpose, to inform my classroom agenda, to guide the children toward a tolerant, inclusive, peaceful, and socially conscious experience as they grow. I tend to tell parents when the topic comes up that the children might not leave my classroom as expert mathematicians or perfect spellers, but they will be consciously practicing kindness, acceptance, and awareness of the ways that they can contribute to social justice. I have taken this mission seriously, as I have seen abundant evidence that anti-racist, anti-bias conversations are not happening in many classrooms and schools. I have heard white parents express their concern that my children are too young to learn about topics such as slavery and civil rights. But it was a proud moment to hear a couple of the youngest children in the classroom take an active stance against racism in the classroom completely independently, and exemplified the need for this type of goal to be present in more Montessori classrooms. That's why I do what I do. As my colleague and friend stated recently, and I am always trying to find a succinct way to say, teaching is my activism. So I'm curious, how did those two videos strike you? How does that move you to examine things in the classroom? Are there things that you know can change up? Are there ideas that you have for how they can change?
Cindy, thank you. We have Kitty Bravo with her hand up. So Kitty, if you can unmute.
Okay. I attended yesterday the PBS, the last of the 4 PBS workshops, and you can, I'm sure you can find them if you Google PBS. They've done a series on racism in education. And they talked about this and how important it is for us to help all of our children be comfortable with their identity and who they are. And they talked about exploring skin color from a very young age in a positive way. And the first time I ever saw that, I don't know if she's on today's call, Lori Karmazin has a lesson she did in her classroom where she had different types of food that are different shades from very light to very brown. And the children compare the honey, the cinnamon, whatever, and they find their skin color and they compare each other's skin color. And they talk about it in a really light and positive way. And the other thing they said in this, in the workshop yesterday, or the webinar yesterday, was to talk with very young children about the science behind skin color. So they understand this is not, you're not brown because you're bad or because you drink too much chocolate milk, as one child said. You know, you know, this is a natural thing that happens and there's a reason for it. And, you know, I think that's the kind of gift we can give children in our classroom, because it's very simple to put those kinds of lessons right in our classroom and make it part of the discussions that we're having. And these are the commitments we all need to have to make sure these lessons end up in our teacher training programs, and that we're teaching to have these dialogues from a very young age. And I'll just say, it just broke my heart to see that video just now, and know that those children felt that way about themselves.
Thank you, Kitty.
Thanks, Kitty. We have a couple of comments too, and I agree, Kitty, just heartbreaking. James McGee says, the videos may be very sad. I would hope a child never found him or herself to be ugly or bad. But now, from my experience as a human and as an American, that many aspects of our history and current culture influences children and adults to see themselves as less than. No, not now. James, of course, we're happy to hear from you if you'd like to unmute. And then we have Siobhan Emmanuel says, I've never seen the style test before, but it made me wonder if this is why people have always tried to figure me out. Ever since I moved from Florida, from New York when I was 10 years old, people have asked me questions like, what are you? Where are you from? When I said that I am Black, they seemed confused. Immediately the response is, you can't be Black. You don't look or act Black.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Kathleen, you have your hand up. Go ahead. And then we'll go to Amanda. I see your hand up too. So Kathleen, there you go. You're unmuted. Yeah.
On the doll test, of course, it made me extremely sad that children would respond that way about themselves. And it made me remember that my favorite doll back in the day I've lived quite a while. They were china. They were hard. I don't even know if they were plastic or what they were, but when they broke, you could take them to the doll hospital and get them fixed. And my favorite doll was Janie Lee, and she was a doll of color. And I just, you know, anyway, it took me back to those days and how much I loved that doll and how she didn't look anything like me. And I loved her. And I wish there could be more experiences like that, you know, for children. I don't know who gave me the doll. I don't know how it ended up in my, you know, house. My mom was extremely inclusive as a person. So she probably bought it for me, or maybe my godmother, I don't know. But it was, I still have it. I still have it. The other thing about skin color, when I went into the public school to teach at the elementary level, one of the things that was astounding was the children they were all children of color. And some of them called the others black. Well, you're so black. And after a few days of that, I had them line up. We did a skin tone comparison, and I started, and they said, "You're white." And I pulled up a piece of white paper and I put it against my skin, and I said, "Well, do you think I'm white?" And then they all agreed I was probably pink. So I was the start of the lineup, and then one by one they got in line according to their skin color. And then I had each child come out and look at the lineup, and they said, "We make a rainbow of color." And it really raised their awareness that I don't know, for want of something else, maybe using correct, you know, language when talking about each other, because it was a disparaging remark when one 6-year-old called another one black, and they were both dark-skinned. And that seemed to take care of it. You know, they had a whole new appreciation, and we did talk about the science behind it and why I looked the way I did, why I had freckles, why they didn't. And it really went a long way to help in the classroom. So that's just an experience I had that this is bringing out in memory.
Thank you, Kathleen. Kathy, before you move on, if I can comment to James, it is sad to think, and I'm sure that many people would not want to think that there are more children who feel this way about themselves, but it is a given among many people of color communities and very many African American communities that there is something negative about being Black. That is why the expression, I say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, that James Brown created, that came out of all of that. It was this movement to try to help African Americans to claim who they are and to say that that your color is okay, and that was an attempt to shift something psychologically that has been just inherent from so long, because children have seen from times of slavery that it is because of your skin color that bad things happen. And so consequently, you must be bad. And all of the things that get said or got said back at that time are things that have carried along in time with people who have passed stories on and passed on information. And even shades of, and Kathleen, as you were telling your story, I was feeling this feeling inside of myself, because if I was in that lineup, I would be fearful to be the last one. I wouldn't want to be the one who was darkest. That would scare the daylights out of me. And I thought, oh my gosh, but that is also because growing up, I was the darkest person in my family and very aware of that. And my family was very aware of that. My neighbors were very aware of that. And so it's shades of colorism, it's shades of racism that end up happening. And all of that is what children carry walking into the classroom, which is which is the piece that we have to help them move past. And I'm glad that worked for you, Kathleen, in your environment. And in some environments that would probably be a little frightening.
Okay, I'm going to go to Amanda.
Hi, I wanted to say thank you for.
Oh, James, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, James.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you to Cindy for mentioning James Brown's song. I was about to type that comment right in there because that was a song I remember hearing when I was a child. And I don't know in our current culture if part of that spirit got lost along the way somewhere, or if it's just that I'm not as aware of it. I hear a lot of popular music of various kinds, and some of it is more or less woke, but that was definitely a song that, you know, I remember as a child. I thought it was pretty cool at the time. In my household, my parents, you know, were more understanding. My mother used to say, she said to me recently, and she used to say back in the day, she said, if I were Black, she said, I would probably be the most militant person out there. Because, you know, if you know my mother, she's rather a person with rather strong feelings. And so when, you know, so when some of those things were happening at the time that some people were calling militancy, my mother was saying, well, if I were Black, I think I would be angry. I think I'd be one of the most militant people out there. But yeah, I made that comment about it makes me sad, but I know what you say, that I do believe that there are children that, well, they call it self-hating, right? Self-hating. And there are people that self-hate for race or for what other things that have nothing to do about anything except the way that they were born and the way that they're made to feel by society. And but it does make me sad, but that's why we need to do something about it. Not because it makes us sad, but because it's wrong.
Yes, thank you. Kathy, who was next?
Yeah, Amanda is next. So if you can unmute Amanda, and then we have a few comments in the chat box as well we can look at.
Hello.
Hi, Amanda.
I just wanted to add, when we were talking about like how to create an anti-bias classroom, I was just going to share a couple of things that I do. One thing is just taking a really critical look at the materials that you bring to your classroom. When I was first teaching, I teach in a first through sixth grade environment. And I just, you know, you're looking for things that kind of match your lessons. And so one of our lessons was about, you know, basic materials like wheat and corn and things like that. And so we got all these different lessons, you know, with cotton and things like that. So I got books and things. And then what ended up happening, I took a look at them one day. I was looking at all of my cotton books just to see, like, why do I have, you know, 3 of them? And so I opened them up. And it was, when I got it, I was just so focused on the content about cotton as a fiber. I wasn't paying so much attention to the pictures, and then I was. And that kind of happens sometimes, right? And so I was paying attention, and one of the books was called Cotton from Bowl to Bolt. And it had these pictures drawn of, every single page was only white people. And all of the pictures were of people in the fields, white people picking cotton. All of them were personified as these very happy, smiling, family-like people. There was no diversity whatsoever. Everyone was like thrilled to be using a cotton gin. There was no discussion of the history of cotton or anything. And separately, another book that I had, which was a little bit more advanced, it had an entire discussion about the ramifications of cotton and slavery and what that has done to us as humans. It had every single page had people, exclusively people of color. It talked about how nations that grow cotton tend to be places that are dictated by climate, but places that use cotton tend to be third world nations who are manufacturing goods from it because of cheap labor. It talks about slavery, and it talks about the places benefiting from cotton. The entire book, like, it was so eye-opening just to examine my own curriculum materials for how, as a reader and as a student, how that would create bias just through the pictures and the story that it tells between the words. So just be critical about the actual materials you put in your classroom, for one. Also, I think as adults, we all know, like, our history books lie to us. You grow up and you like learn that you know, basically had this very whitewashed and very incorrect history kind of spoon-fed to us as children, and you have to deal with that. And I think as an educator, kids are totally fine to hear the truth. And I've learned that time and time again. When I talk to my kids we talk very openly about race issues, slavery. We have, you know, sometimes some emotional conversations where kids are talking about their feelings. And those are things that they're totally okay with hearing. They enjoy learning from each other. They've embraced a diversity in my classroom that I feel like is a little unusual, because there's no like elephant in the room where nobody talks about it. Like, people are very open and frank about all of those things. I tell them honestly, I'm like, oh, history books lie to you. Grown-ups will tell you lies. And I talk to them about just some of that, like, not in a bad way, but I tell them about some of these stories. I'm like, look at these differing perspectives. Which one do you think makes sense? What do you think about the people who wrote these historical documents? Let's look at their history. We talk about all those things as part of the history too, and how history comes to be made. And I let them come to their own conclusions. Also, we did the same thing like you did, Kathleen, when we had discussions of this kind of black-white dichotomy. We used, I have a 350 pack of colored pencils, and we all like color matched ourselves with colored pencils. And it turns out none of us are black and none of us are white. And so that really opened up some conversations with us about identity versus color and what that means to us, because surprisingly, some of our kids who identify as black ended up being the same color as kids who identify as white. And we discussed that and like why we have this different view of people's identity separate from what they think about themselves. So some of those just kind of activities, but I think mostly it's just being honest with your students about it and not trying to shield them from that scary stuff. Like, kids can talk about race just as easily as adults can, maybe actually probably better, easier for them. But anyway, those are just a couple of things that I do. Oh, and the last thing is I do a secret history project, because a lot of our stories have been kind of whitewashed, and we miss the stories of people that have contributed, like all of the black colonists that no one ever talks about. We miss a lot of the explorers who showed white people who were given credit for their discoveries and things like that. And we miss those stories of these amazing indigenous and people of color from all over the world. And so I find those stories and I bring them in, and I have this whole secret history project where I put pictures of them in a little frame that has doors. You open it up, and if a kid finds the picture, they get the story. So they're always looking like, who's next? And they're so excited. And so as soon as they find it, I just drop everything and tell the story. And the kids they just eat up those stories. And that's a way to really easily bring in conversations that are challenging about some of those complex histories in a way that's loving and embracing. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Really nice idea. If no one's writing down your ideas, there is a good one. And Kathleen's, as you mentioned, showing that race is a social construct is what Kathleen was describing in essence, is that my skin isn't actually white. It's something that I'm called. And when we look at the colors of who we are, they don't match those social racial binaries. Those are things that were constructed.
So, Cindy, let me ask you about that, because you shared your feelings if you had been in Kathleen's classroom with that one activity that you would have been really frightened, or, you know, I sort of, what came to mind for me is, you know, when people pick teams and you know you're going to be the last one picked, you know, and it's just this sinking feeling because you know it's going to happen. And so, you know, to put children in that, and no one intended that, you know, so I don't know that I would have thought of that. So Kitty talks about the different foods and lining them up, or colored pencils, or I've seen people do paint mixing or color matching, or I've seen these activities a lot. And so I'm just wondering, are these activities misguided? on our part?
Well, I think that there's a difference between making the racial color change as though something is good or bad when you line people up. That's the part that's scary to me. Making the sharing the information about colors and differences, as when Kathleen said, she put a piece of white paper next to her and said, this is white, I'm not white, is the beginning of being able to explain to children that someone created that. Somebody made that up and called somebody that was, Kathleen, I think you said, they said you're pink, white. Somebody created that. And as children start to get older, we can give them more information. This was constructed. It was one of the worst possible constructions that we could have had, because it's created something that has lasted throughout time and caused so much hurt. And that's unfortunate. And we're fixing it by educating people and by letting people know about that. And to just look at the fact that we all are made up of different colors. The one that I showed when the PBS NewsHour came out to my school, we really showed children that we're a mix of many colors, that it takes, and that's our total point in sharing that with children. We're a mix of many colors. In order to create your skin color, it takes more than one. And that's a piece that I think is eye-opening for children. But we also have to hold that carefully with identity, because of that racial construct, we have had to often identify ourselves within one of those pieces, and particularly biracial children often do. Sometimes they say I'm biracial, but sometimes they say I am Black. That's who I am. That's how I feel within me. That to me, I identify more with the Black people in my family, or I identify more with the white people in my family, or with the Latinx people in my family. And that is their own personal identification, and they may have that. And so we don't want to say, well, you're not Black. We can say, look at what comes up and creates the color that you are. It creates many different colors.
Okay, thank you. John, I know you'd like to go, and then after John, we'll go to Helen.
Cindy, I'm wondering whether another part of this, as we present these kinds of exercises and discussions to children, since we don't really know what children are necessarily bringing to the table in terms of their life experiences, whether this really demands us for being, again, really acute Montessori observers and checking in with children, how they are taking different exercises that we're giving. And I think if we're only on the presentation side of this equation and we're not really observing and checking in with children, we've got to be sensitive to how children are responding to these exercises, and then adjusting the course and perhaps having some intimate conversations with children who are taking this in a negative light toward themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'd like to just acknowledge, Amanda, that there's many requests for information from you about the Secret History Project. And so if you would want to share anything on that, if you could let us know, then we'd be happy to get in touch with you and talk about what's the best way to share with the whole group, if you're interested in that, because I know people would really appreciate that. And can you tell us what school you're with as well? Because I think that would be wonderful to acknowledge.
We're at Westaboo Montessori School in Augusta, Georgia.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we have Helen is waiting with her hand up. So Helen, if you could unmute.
Hi, everybody. Just like to thank everyone again. I learned so much every week, but Amanda, those are great ideas. Kathleen, that was really inspiring. Kitty, just really great ways to think about, these situations or these teachable moments. I spent the last week thinking about like stuff in the classroom and how that can, relate to racism and how to deal with it. And I was thinking about like the colored tablets in the children's house, and then thinking about the language. We talk about white people and Black people, but where does that lead everybody, leave everyone else? but also it brought me to thinking about, it's probably one of the most important things is making sure we have just a supportive environment so that children are comfortable, sharing and opening up about these things. I know I talk about my personal experiences a lot, but I was pissed off for way into my adult years. It took me years to really kind of process it all and not be, on edge so much about people saying stuff, that entitled attitude where, a light-colored person feels like they can just ask anything. The person who, would approach Siobhan, even 2 years ago, I had a woman just come up to me and say, "What are you?" It's like, what? And it's just so, it's embarrassing. It's infuriating. So if we can support our students so that they can learn how to deal with that, so that they are not spending a lot of time and energy and years being upset and trying to figure it out, and understanding that even though this person is making their problem your problem, it's really that other person's problem in their ignorance. For me, Cindy, you were talking about biracial. My Western European ancestors came to the United States in 1636. So when people were even adults, when I was an adult telling me, go back to your own country, it's like, well, and I'm part Native American. So it's like, this is just ridiculous. All these assumptions that are made, chances are my people were here maybe long before, theirs. And why do they think that they can judge people like that? But if we can support students, that's probably one of the greatest gifts we can give them, so that they can not skip a beat and just process it and, shine on and not let it take them down.
Yeah, one of the worst possible phrases that we could use to a child when it has to do with issues that have to do with disenfranchisement and racism, etc., is to say, oh, use your words. Because many children don't have the words. They have the feelings. And they need someone else to be able to help them to start to develop those words, and to be the guide in the classroom by being unaccepting of things that children say and that adults say that are hurtful and that are racial and that are that all of the other isms that come into that affect children in gender or sexual orientation or culture, that we need to disallow it. We just need to disallow it. And we need to give them the tools about how to respond back.
Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't answer her right away because I didn't want to play that stupid game. So when I finally told her my mom was Korean and I'm half Korean, she said, oh, okay. And I said, well, no. And I started telling her the rest of my family history and she didn't want to hear it. She said, no, I'm good now. It's like, well, you might be, but I'm not. So I spent the next 15 minutes just giving her a very detailed account of my entire family history. It was good. So hopefully she learned something.
I have a question for you, Cindy, follow up on that. So how do we help children know how to answer that question? Because they inevitably will be asked that question, right? Because what you're bringing to light here and what these stories are bringing to light is that question continues to happen.
I think there are two parts to it. I think the first part is helping children to learn who they are. There are many families that really don't know, and children don't know. And we first need to give them that To me, that's a really important part that needs to happen at the very beginning of the school year, that has to do with the finding out who you are. Even if you are a child who was adopted and your family doesn't know, that you come up with who you are in your family of creation, but you need a something. So to me, that's one piece, and that you open that up so that it isn't a silent question. It isn't the question by the tree or underneath the climbing structure, and that we start to give children dialogues. It's the same grace and courtesy kinds of lessons of what do you say when you're going to pass someone through the door, or whatever the grace and courtesy lesson is. That we have those conversations. We have those conversations where someone asks the question and someone else gives an answer, but you give them the equipment that they need to be able to have a response back. And if that response is, I'm comprised of many things, but I actually don't want to have this conversation with you, that they can also do that, but that you allow them to be able to explore what are the possible things that you can say, and that you act it out so that they learn how to do that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Leslie, you had your hand up. Do you want to unmute?
I got lost for a minute of what the question was. We were talking that people kept saying that question, that question, that question, that question. I wasn't exactly sure what the question was. I think I figured it out. I think the question is, what are you, or where are you from? I'm not sure what the question is, and
yeah, what are you, I think was the actual question, Helen, is that correct? Yeah, okay, what are you?
And so as I'm listening to this conversation, that along with the activity of lining up and various things that have been said, like I feel as if there are many things that are offensive, and I struggle to know if something I say might offend somebody. Like, what if I say something that's going to offend somebody and I didn't realize, and so I'm really kind of almost feeling like maybe it's just better not to say anything at all to anybody that I don't know, for fear of offending. Like, how do you get around accidentally saying something that's a faux pas because you didn't know any better, or you didn't know, or you didn't realize? I mean, I thought it was interesting, Cindy, when you said that you would have felt really uncomfortable if you had been the darkest one in that lineup of colors, which is something that would never have occurred to me. Like, I wouldn't have thought of that. And how do we go about, I mean, like, I want to be sensitive to other people's needs, but I also have my own curiosity. I mean, like, I am always curious to ask people where they're from, simply because I'm curious to learn about maybe what things we have in common. You know, Amanda's at a school in Georgia. I used to live in Georgia. Oh, do we have something in common? Could we have some shared experiences? Could we interact about something that we share? And so I ask those kinds of questions just because of a curiosity to learn more about people, to understand others, to anyways, and so, but I get real fearful in conversations like this because, man, it sounds like there's thousands of things that I could say that might offend somebody, and how do I even know what might be offensive? And so my takeaway is just, maybe it's better just to not speak up at all.
You know, I can understand how that might be a piece for you, and I don't know if Siobhan, if you're open to commenting, or Helen, if you're open to commenting, what would you prefer people ask, or would you prefer that they don't ask? I would be interested in hearing that from either of the two of you. And Leslie, I would also say that I think that here is the safe place for us to be able to explore those kinds of things. That's part of the work that we're doing now. And part of my work is to push back gently when I hear something, because I want to enlighten other people about another way to be able to look at it. But I would say that if you are coming to know someone, And in natural human conversation, you're coming to know about somebody as you're asking about what's their favorite foods and things like that, that those kind of questions can come up, which is a different story than just coming up to somebody and saying what makes you you, ultimately, is what somebody is saying. And that may not, because of the nature of what people do with that kind of information historically, it can often be something that might be off-putting or a little scary to people. I mean, historically, if you were 1% Black, that got you into a whole lot of trouble and disallowed you from doing the majority of things that other people in community did. And so the question in itself can end up being one that has a place way down deep. It may not be something that means anything right now necessarily, but it's so deep that it carries for some people and makes them feel differently. Yes. Helen and Sarah.
So I realized that, at least, with my experience, I found that people were either, really racist and angry and terrible, saying you never should have been born, and your dad should have married a white woman, and all this crap. So there's that set of people. But then there's like kind of the curious people who ended up being offensive, but I don't think that they really meant to be rude and racist. They just ended up that way. But I put it in the chat, but I think, if you're really, concerned about, offending somebody, go back to grace and courtesy. Like, how would you want to be approached? How would you want a stranger or someone you're just getting to know to ask you personal questions like that? So kind of, walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, or ask them, can I ask you a personal question? That at least will kind of give the other person a chance to, prepare themselves, I guess, because I really think minorities, and I'm curious, how many people of color here have never had a racist or a prejudicial experience, and how many, pale-skinned people have had a problem? I, was thinking about that, but it's just, we learn these things. That's how young children, like in the doll test, learn about, the good white doll and the bad Black doll. It's these social messages that are out there that sometimes they're spoken, sometimes they're just, in the messaging and, products or shows or whatever.
Thanks, Helen. Siobhan, did you want to comment on that? And then we'll go to Sarah. You can just unmute. There you go.
Hi, everyone. I think it's the depth of the question that's the piece. And I didn't realize that growing up, but as I got older and I started to remember that feeling of, I've been asked this so many times before, I think that's the piece for me, is just the depth of where that question can go and the intentions and the motives behind that question.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as Siobhan did. I think when a white person asks that question, I think we have to really think twice before we ask it, because we have to know why. Are we putting someone in a box? Are we getting an answer? Why is that a question that would come that early in a relationship that I think that our jump to want to know what someone is something we've learned. We've learned it through media. We've learned it through a lot of places. So I think if that comes up for us as an early question, I think that's a good exercise to don't ask the question, but ask yourself why you're wanting to know that information. What does it give to say, you know, oh, now I know that Siobhan is X, Y, or Z. I can put her in a pigeonhole, or I'll treat her differently because now I know she's Black, or now I know it really actually doesn't have the importance of so many other things we want to talk about with a person we're just meeting. You know, what makes you tick? What's your favorite kind of movie? You know, all the things that might be of interest and share, you might find common ground. So it's that intention that I think is really important, that people who are white in particular stop and think about before they ask questions.
Thank you. Jonathan, we'll go to you next, and then Sherelle.
Yeah, Leslie, I want to take a little different tact on your wonderful question. I'm wondering also whether part of this is, are we creating emotionally safe spaces in our schools for adults to, in a respectful and gentle way, call each other when we make a mistake? You know, we white people, we've lived in our little bubble of privilege, and we're going to make mistakes. And we need to have the wherewithal to be called on it. To me, that's another form of adult grace and courtesy. We're really committed to anti-racism, both on a curricular level in the classroom, but also on a cultural level in our school. Are we willing to, you know, say what we say without a lot of trepidation, but also have the humility to go, you know, John, let me share something with you. And for John to be able to say, thank you. Thank you for opening my mind to that. And I think that's part of the adult grace and courtesy that I think will be the foundation for actually the curricular change.
Mm. Thanks, John. Go to Sherelle. I think you are unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Jonathan just mentioned some of what I was going to say in response to Leslie, and then Jennifer did in the chat as well. I think it's about what happens when somebody calls you on it. One of the terms that I've been getting to know this summer, as all this work has been happening throughout the country and around the world, is the notion of a brave space rather than a safe space. And that we create places like this where you can come and be vulnerable and know that people will call you on stuff if you need to be called on stuff, and that you need to be okay with that. We expect the children that the students in front of us and beside us and behind and everywhere to make mistakes and to be okay with correction. And we have to do it too. We have to model it by saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, and I will do better. One of my favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou. I just put in the chat, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. And that's the commitment that we have to make for this work. We're going to mess up. We're going to tick people off. We're going to get our feelings hurt. And we still have to keep on going. We still have to keep on doing it. And that's the piece where that's a vulnerability that can be very difficult to feel and to let be there. And it can feel really raw, and you can feel really shitty when you make a mistake and somebody calls you on it. But if we're going to grow, growth is not smooth. If it's smooth, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Thank you. Don't see any more hands up. There's a lot of comments going on in the chat box, so make sure you check that out, and resources being shared there as well. A lot of interesting things, particularly about Leslie's question and being willing to accept criticism, right? That we're going to make mistakes and to be out there and be vulnerable. And also, I think, you know, in light of the history and the pain of the history, us being uncomfortable to a certain degree seems really minor, or even to be criticized seems really minor in the light of the painful history and a lot of what's currently happening as well. Just reminding everybody, Tanya put in the chat box that if you click the 3 dots on the bottom of your chat box, you will give you an opportunity to save that. And we are recording this so that it will be posted on Montessori Conversations Facebook page, Montessori Foundation Facebook page, as well as on the Montessori Foundation YouTube channel. And you can find both of those on our website at montessori.org. If you click there, you'll see the different recordings that we've had over the past few months.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, so I wanted you to think in terms of areas of the environment, and I mentioned this before, I think week before last, about the importance of timelines, which we all know is critical in a Montessori environment. And what it does in terms of race is to help children to recognize how great were, how vast and how deep were the contributions of people of color in America. And I'll give you just a couple, but there's something that you can research. I think it's called something like what if I woke up one day and Black people hadn't invented something. I forget. Sarah, I think you've seen that before. But the gear shift, the first clock, elevator doors, the blimp, blood bank, clothes dryer, dustpan, lawn sprinkler, mailbox, the modern lock, the mop, pacemaker, the portable pencil sharpener, potato chips, the reversible baby stroller. Things like that are things that were all created by people who were African American. And there are so many Black inventors that it's just unbelievable to, if you were to go through and label the things in your environment and how they actually came to be, or who was the person who was responsible, and with a picture of them for children to be able to see that. It speaks things that you don't even have to say, just in having that in your environment. And if that was just something that children walked into, or that it was a part of requirement of elementary students to contribute to the children in the children's house, to provide that for them so that they had that kind of information in the classroom. Does anybody have any other ideas about, in the cultural area, things that you could do differently?
I'm watching for hands to go up, or you can put it in the chat.
And while you're thinking about that, I've mentioned before changing up your conception of peoples of the world, because you should be looking at the actual continents, because you will see far more people of color than we present or have presented historically to children. And so you can't separate them out in the same way as we used to. And to be able to separate the continents and then separate the people, that the people who look like this came from there and the people who look like this came from there, that's not the case anymore. And so to open up children's eyes to how we have moved around, and how there are so many people of color in so many continents, also gives the statement that we can be together, and we are together, and we don't need to be segregated, and we are not segregated. And so we need to treat ourselves as though we all belong, and that we belong everywhere. Any other?
Yeah, we have James's hands up. James, if you want to go. I think your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just thinking, yeah, it was, thanks. Cindy was saying something profound about, the picture of the person that invented the thing. And I just had to think, and sadly, however, think about all the talent that was suppressed or lost, or even, co-opted, right? So that's something to be aware of, is that, right, we could definitely do that, but then we'd have to teach the children the reality is that, African-American people in this country, especially, right, were not given the recognition for the things they invented probably half the time, or weren't given the opportunity and the education that would have allowed them to be even more of a contributor. I mean, how hard did George Washington Carver have to work in his day to make the contributions he made? If everybody had been on an equal footing from the start, the contributions that were recognized by African Americans would be even greater. There's a movie right now on Prime Video explaining that the Volkswagen was probably actually the idea was invented by a Jewish man named Joseph Ganz, but then Hitler suppressed the fact that Joseph Ganz had invented the first people's car with all the very innovative attributes, and made Ferdinand Porsche be the recognized inventor of the car. So just imagine all the things that, you know, African-American people could have done, you know, with the equal footing of education from the very start, when if they had arrived to this country voluntarily. You know, and the novel by Ta-Nehisi Coates that I'm listening to right now, that message is brought in again and again and again, that, you know, this country, everything about this country, the wealth, the generation of wealth, would not have been possible, you know, in the same way without that terrible institution of slavery, but that the contribution of the people creating all that wealth, creating all that genius, you know, the fact that, you know, the plantations were run probably mostly through the genius of supervisors, and that were all African-American, you know, and that it was never recognized. They were never given that recognition. So that's what Coates kind of points out, you know, that the South exhausted Virginia, and then they just moved west, you know, and exploited people in the creation of all that wealth, and exploited people, you know, as they moved them further west. So yeah, it's a great exercise, but I just imagine what even more could have been. And even today, there's probably so much genius that's being lost because we still don't have this level of equality in this country. So it's a great exercise, but I think that has to be brought home for children to realize that, you know, that potential should not be lost in the future. We've lost it maybe in the past to a great extent, but we shouldn't lose it going forward. That was just a thought that I had.
Yeah, you know, there are the things that we know about, and that were contributions and inventions that were created by African Americans, and then there are also the things that were taken by slave owners, and then they patented and were given the credit, but they actually were not the people who created the invention. And so to provide your classroom with the information in the simplest way in CASA and Children's House is just to show them what happened, to show them who are the people who are responsible for that, and to let their face make the statement. I don't know if anybody else has another thought, but and this is something that I mentioned before, but I would love to challenge you to have 1 year of only information that has people of color in it, and to see what that's like, to just turn that around. And what I mean by that is also your 3-part cards, your books that children would read, your other areas of language, your other areas of history or geography, that you switched out those materials for 1 year of just people of color. That the books that the children were looking at were all people of color. I mean, and although that would seem like it's very uncomfortable to some people, it's been the other way for so long. It would be an interesting experience for Montessorians to just see what that does after a year.
Oh, I love the idea. I'd love it if people would, if you are willing to try it, if you would actually document what happens through blogs, journals, photos, reflections that we could publish and share with people, and encourage others to consider that. So I so appreciate that, Cindy. Amanda did have a comment to share, and I know that we have limited time left. Maybe we'll talk more about how we can do your challenge, Cindy. But Amanda, if you want to unmute, go ahead.
I just wanted to share one really easy way if you're trying to bring about some of your lessons about culture without it feeling so, you know, Eurocentric. When I do my American history curriculum, because in the Georgia State Standards, it's like 1st through 5th grade, they learn American history. And then 6th grade, they jump into world history, which I do it all all of it all the time. But with that American history culture, instead of teaching it like the Europeans came here and now let's learn about the Native Americans, like the kind of way we were taught, I kind of do it differently. I start with all kinds of Native Americans. There's lots of resources online I can share where it's Native Americans have put together maps that are interactive, and you can actually see that there were millions and millions of different people who lived here pre-Columbian times. And so I start with that and talk about the indigenous peoples of America. And then instead of going into the colonials, which I think is the kind of traditional route, instead I go straight into like Incan and Mayan and Aztec history and talk about like the other indigenous people of the Americas. And then I move in and talk about the Portuguese and the Spaniards and different people who came in to colonize parts of America in the same time period, right after Columbus came. I talk very openly about the words discovery and how you can discover a place that millions of people already know and live in. We talk a lot about words like that and about how like this was a discovery for Europeans, but really not for anyone else, We also give them lots of theories about different other stories. I also include aliens. Kids love this. Talk about other explorers who possibly have discovered that first. They love learning it. Like it's kind of like instead of from the Northeast coast to the West history, just trying to introduce history from the West to the East, with Europeans being the last discoverers of America. And then we kind of move on from there. But that's just kind of an easy way, if you think about it from west to east instead of east to west, as how you can put in the work as a teacher and like find out ways to bring in history in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And, it's funny, there are many schools that do not know the history of the ground underneath them. And children should know that. They should know, when Montessori talks about it, appreciating people and the way that we learn about how we treat other people, some of that is also understanding where you are and appreciating where you are. And so to have children walk in the door knowing whose land is that their school sits on, and what is the history of those people, and just appreciating that they are able to use that space that does not belong to them, is a piece that helps us in that anti-domination part of anti-racism.
So Cindy, we have an interesting question. There's many comments in the question in the chat box, so people will want to save that. But Karen Kelly asked a question. She says, "What is our vision? Sometimes we need to be able to imagine that beloved community locally and globally in order to start working towards it. The reconstruction of society that Maria Montessori wrote about." And I know, Cindy, for our task force, you really do have a vision of where we're going with this. Do you mind just spending a minute or so kind of talking to people about where are we going here?
Yeah, can you read it? Kathy, do you have it?
I don't have it in front of me, but we can always post it. But more importantly, it's just our thoughts about where we're going.
Yeah, what we are hoping for is that we have done our work in being able to flip a historical switch that has happened over time, and that our hope is that we can look at the work internally and that we can look at it systemically, so that what we do is something that changes history, that as an association, as an organization, that we have done the work that we need to do to change the course of action that has happened racially, and that within our classrooms that we roll out teachers who are racially conscious, not that are blind, colorblind, but that can help children to appreciate who they are and the color that they are and the race that they are, and that we look at how we can push back on things that are racist, so that we are we are creating a curriculum and a system and a way of being and honoring of the child and who they are and where they came from, that shows consciousness and empathy and justice, and that we give children the tools to be able to be resilient people who also know how to lead and change the world in that area. Because what we're asking, what we're tasked with now is switching something that has happened since the 1600s, which is quite a task. But children are the ones who can do that. If we can engage them in that work, and if we can start by understanding that part ourselves and being able to switch us up so that we can start to teach them.
Yeah, thank you. And we are in such a unique position to have that kind of effect on ourselves and on future teachers, teacher educators, and of course with the children. And while you were sharing that, I did go ahead and paste in the vision and mission statements that we have for our task force. So if you want to see those, they're there. The vision is end of racism within our systemic structure and practices and our individual norms, values, and practices. The mission is to evaluate, change, and hold accountable all policies and practices within the IMC and the Montessori Foundation to be informed by the principles of anti-racism, and to educate all those connected to the IMC or the Montessori Foundation regarding racism, its underpinnings, and intersection across gender, poverty, sexual orientation, and culture. So it's fairly broad, and on behalf of the IMC and the Montessori Foundation, I would say we hope this for the whole Montessori community, and we hope that that impact is worldwide beyond the Montessori community. Helen had her hand up, and then we really have to just a few minutes to wrap up. So Helen?
Really quickly, Cindy, I agree. We shouldn't be colorblind, but we also have to change that narrative so that doll test never happens again. If it's a social construct, somebody created it, we're society, we have the power to change that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Amanda is sharing that the Georgia Teachers Montessori Partnership of Georgia is also hosting a series of discussions over the next year on topics related to anti-racism and how to directly combat oppression through our work with Montessori. That's great. Thanks for sharing that resource. As I said, there's many resources here, and I believe also AMS, the American Montessori Society, is hosting August 27th, I believe. You can find it on our website. We have a link to register. Free, and Cindy, you may be presenting at that as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So many organizations are engaging in this important work, and we do all want to work together to spread the word as much as we can and invite as many people to as many different forums. It's not going to be one organization or one meeting that makes the change.
Yes. Kathy, I'd like to end with a piece that some people probably listen to if you listen to the service of John Lewis. But I want you to hear it and see it. And Sarah, if you can put that on, because he leaves with such a charge. I just love it. I love the fact that even in his going, he charged us with something.
Yeah.
John Lewis's last words appeared in the New York Times today in an essay that he wrote shortly before his death, intending it to be published on the day of his funeral. Here is that essay, read for us today by John Lewis's friend and admirer, Morgan Freeman.
While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people motivated simply by human compassion laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself, that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change. And that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
That's our charge. Thank you so much. So next week, we're going to talk about the school level, what school leaders need to be doing. And I also want to encourage people who have the ability to look at the entirety of John Lewis's, not only the ceremony, but also the travel around the day before to do so.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Sarah, for handling all the videos, and I believe everybody. Think the links to the are in the chat. So again, save the chat. And we thank you all for being willing to be here and for engaging in the deep study and conversation. We look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thank you.
Thank you.